This is our first time using Big Marker, so please do bear with us if there are any technical difficulties. And a little bit of housekeeping. We've got a Q&A on the side. Please do ask any questions during the webinar, and I'll do my best to answer them at the end of the webinar. There will also be a feedback survey at the end. I'd really appreciate it if you could fill this in. It really helps us make these sessions more valuable for you guys. Yeah, there are also bits of this talk where I'd love a little bit of interaction from you. I've created some polls so we can see how our assumptions line up against reality. And as a final note, this is being recorded and slides will be made available after. So yeah, just sit back, relax, and enjoy. So why are we here today? Well, people want change. From the Me Too movement to Black Lives Matter, people have galvanized some in our industry to reflect, take responsibility, and commit to progress. And progress we are making, albeit slowly. And now I'm assuming, due to the fact that you're here today, you care about equality, progress, and creating a better world for everyone. Obviously, there are some things getting in the way of this better world. And without being reductionist, I think it's fair to say that by and large, the majority of the blame is on bias. And this includes conscious bias, from cultural norms, which lead to stereotyping, objectifying, and a lack of opportunities, and even harm. And also unconscious bias, which shows up in subtle ways and in subtle attitudes and behaviors, but it's also just as destructive. And as Mark Pritchard says, what if all brands and companies, both individually and collectively, use their reach and voice in advertising as a force for good to eliminate bias and promote equality? Imagine the impact. Because when you look at media, and I mean all forms of visual content, you realize that we're falling short. Not only are we not reflecting people in authentic and relevant ways, but we also rely on cognitive shortcuts in the shape of cliches, stereotypes, and tropes to tell stories. And studies have shown that people believe what they see, and in turn, have trouble imagining things that they cannot see. Other representation and studies have shown that media consumption impacts mental health. 52% increase in major depression in adolescents from 2005 to 2017. Also, sexualization of women in media has been linked to eating disorders, low self-esteem, and depression in girls. So one of the leading proponents of gender equality in our industry is Sil Saller, the CMO of Diageo. She is one of many agents of change within the industry who are calling out for more of us to use our creativity, our resources, and our expertise to be the agents of behavioral change for good, to help eliminate bias and stereotypes from our ads. And the fact is, we can use our skills to raise awareness about social injustice and educate people about racial inequality. We have the power to influence culture through what we create in ways that governments and political leaders cannot. We can use humor, education, or brutal honesty to alter the global conversation about racism and gender inequality. Tribalism, maybe not so much though. So if we ask ourselves, what world do we want to create? We spend over $600 billion a year on advertising. And as Jerry Dakin, the head of media for GSK, writes, our content reaches billions of people every day. And we can use that reach to positively challenge social expectations. Diversity doesn't have to be the main subject of an advertisement. Casually improving representation across your output helps to normalize diverse communities and reflects the world without virtual signaling. And here's the thing, on-screen portrayals are easy to fix. Positive depictions have instant impact. And that's what we're here to talk about today. However, we also have to recognize that diversity and inclusion is a complex and multifaceted issue that cannot be solved by more diverse and inclusive characters in our ads alone. Diverse teams are essential. Equality and inclusion is essential. We've got a long way to go. In the US, 5% of people working in advertising identify as African American or Black. Over 50% represent over 50s, represent 6% of the Adland's workforce. And women make up just 32.7% of C-suite roles at IPA member agencies. Looking at these figures on screen, are bad enough, but they're worse when you realize that the world is 70% non-white, according to data from the UNICEF. So, how is this bias affecting us as marketers? Well, by and large, advertisers are confident that they're creating diverse and inclusive advertising that avoids stereotypes and is gender balanced. However, the reality is very different. Consumers feel alienated by the ads we make. According to consumers, our ads don't mirror society, communities, and people. And this is not a moral or a social problem. It's also a business problem too. Unilever found that progressive ads are 25% more effective and deliver better branded impact. Progressive being diverse in race, age, and gender. So, how do we make progressive ads that are free from bias? Well, the first is to recognize that we have to challenge our bias. We have to learn to see what we can't already see. The second, we need data to paint an objective picture of reality so that we can benchmark our current diversity and inclusion efforts so we know what future goals should look like. And third, we need a framework based off of historic data to help us eradicate the stereotypes we find impact our work most. So, how do you go about challenging unconscious biases? Well, the first step is to recognize that as people, we are all flawed and far more biased than we think we are. This is called the bias blind spot. We're very good at recognizing the impact of biases on the judgment of others, but struggle to see the impact of biases on our own. There are 4 biases that are particularly dangerous in our line of work, and especially when it comes to stereotyping ads. For example, we have confirmation bias, the preference for information that confirms preconceptions. You have perception bias, when we make assumptions about groups and fail to see the individual in them. Affinity bias, which is a preference for those that are familiar. And groupthink bias, which is a preference for harmony at the expense of effective decision-making. All in all, these biases underline the need for more diverse teams, but they also highlight the need for an objective framework to dismantle bias at scale across all of the global organizations. Now, this is the part of the webinar where we'd like some audience participation. I've got some polls preset here, and I'd like you to submit your answers so that we can get an idea of how well we think I know our customers based on gender, age, and race. So the first poll is, what percentage of the 2014 to 2018 Super Bowl viewership was female? I'll give you a few moments to submit your answers. There we go. We've got some answers coming in. Nice. Okay, well, generally speaking, it looks like across the board, we think that 30 to 40% of the Super Bowl viewership was female. Well, the reality is 40 to 50%. However, when you dive a little bit deeper into the data, you realize that the ads during the Super Bowl were made by men for men. Women were 9 times more likely to be shown in revealing clothes and 3 times more likely than male characters to be shown as skinny or very skinny. Men were 2 times more likely to be shown as leaders. Now, these assumptions have commercial implications. Women make up the majority of purchases in many categories, but we fail to make appropriate ads for them. Women make up 50% of the world's population, but control far more of the world's wealth in terms of consumer purchasing power. And if you're trying to reach women, you best make sure that you unstereotype your ads, because otherwise they'll switch off. Now, what about race and ethnicity bias? When you think of these outdoor adventuring ads, what picture of the world do you think we're painting? I'll give you a moment here to submit your answers for this particular poll. Right. Well, the responses coming in are painting a slightly different picture. All right, great. Well, the reality is people of color. One survey of Canadians found that by and large, people of color were far more likely to participate in outdoor activities, which really begs the question, why don't we show people of color participating in outdoor activities? And what about age? Our age bias. How much time do we think people over 50 spend consuming media online as opposed to traditional media television? I'll submit the poll here and give you a few seconds to submit your answers. There's a pretty broad range of responses coming in here. All right. Well, most people seem to think that about 60% of over 50s, or 60% of media consumption is spent online. Well, the reality is 50, for the first time in history, people over 50 are actually consuming as much media online as they are traditional measures. I suppose we can't forget that people over 50 were actually responsible for creating the internet in the first place. And just like gender and race bias, age bias has massive commercial consequences as too. Our obsession with youth is killing our profits. The over 50s spending is so high, in fact, that they make up the majority of value in many categories. Campaign found that they make up 60% of all car sales. Lonely Planet claims that they account for 58% of spending in travel and tourism. And Barclays believe that they're responsible for 58% of hospitality and leisure sales. Kantar found that they account for 50% of health and beauty value sales. And Nielsen report that they're responsible for 49% of all FMCG sales. To put it bluntly, the over 50s are the most valuable generation in the history of marketing. And yet, as I'll show you in a bit, they're almost all ignored by advertising. Now, we've shown how bias can lead to faulty assumptions and bad decisions. And we can see why marketers might make certain blanket decisions about certain groups, especially if you might rely on demographic targeting. But what is it about our ads that make people feel unrepresented and alienated? How might we be perpetuating stereotypes that continue to hinder progress in the areas that we really care about? Well, the problem is not seeing the problem. And the best way to see the problem is from another, more objective perspective. What we need is data. Data shows us where our creative blind spots are, allowing us to create benchmarks and frameworks that are objective and hopefully free from bias. And when it comes to diversity and inclusion in media, the Gina Davis Institute is perhaps one of the most robust and largest data sets there is. They're the only research-based organization currently examining representation across 6 identities: gender, race, LGBTQ+, disability, age, and body size. Now, we're working closely with Google. They analyzed 2.7 million ads across 51 markets for 550 billion impressions. Now, we're looking at this data set, as well as the most recent Cannes Lions data set, also conducted by the Gina Davis Institute. So the Cannes Lion data is taken from 251 English-speaking or English subtitled ads over the period of 2019. They analyzed the representation of gender by examining gender and other diverse groups by examining prominence, screen time, speaking time, activities, settings, portrayals of occupation and leadership, personal attributes, and sexualization. And what they found is that the ads that the industry deemed best for 2019 is rather homogenous. But despite the fact that the brands involved in Cannes are global and multicultural, by and large, the ad content that they produced is unrepresentative of the multicultural world we live in. Male characters outnumber female characters by a wide margin in 2019, at 61.4% to 38.6%. And as you can see, not much progress has been made in the ads that we deem the best of the best. Diving deeper into the data, it's clear that we need to stop sexualizing our female characters. You can see our bias at work here. We're far more likely to place male characters in a position of authority or as leaders, and we objectify women or treat them as side characters. We make them out to be unfunny or flat. In short, we perpetuate a world in which women are seen as second-class citizens belonging in a man's world. This is neither the world we want to create, or is it reality? Especially when you consider that that women make up over 50% of the world's population and responsible for the majority of consumer purchasing decisions. Now, these 2.7 million YouTube ads are a fair little better. The biggest problem continues to be that we don't let our female characters speak. Male characters were heard exactly 1.5 times more often globally in all of the videos, despite the fact that they raised 2 times the amount of speaking time. By and large, female sidekick characters who serve more as background filler than real authentic individuals. Now, diving deeper into the verticals, we realize that we actually target women for specific products. Other than the moral and social problems that this causes, it's also bad for business. Women are responsible for 70% of all travel decisions, but receive 47% of screen time and just 42% of speaking time in travel ads. They're responsible for 57% of all consumer electronics purchases, but receive 42% of screen time and 37% of speaking time in technology ads. And the kicker, well, women buy 50% of all new vehicles, and they influence 80% of overall automotive sales. But they receive just a miserly 28% of screen time and 24% of speaking time. Now, this is commercial madness, particularly when you compare it to broader performance data. You see, gender-balanced content leads to better positive business impact. Gender-balanced content garnered 30% more views than male-dominated content. Box office sales increase by 10 million when there is a female lead. And there's a 45% increase in purchase intention when ads portray women equally, respectfully, and appropriately. Brands see an 83% point rise in brand reputation when ads portray women as whole, human, and strong. And as you can see, when it comes to gender stereotypes in our ads, we're guilty of portraying them as secondary to men, that they exist as on-screen as objects and devoid of humor. The social impact is massive in terms of self-esteem and body image, and not portraying them in a healthy, positive way will also cause you to bleed money. Well, how diverse and inclusive are ads when it comes to race and ethnicity? Looking at the representation data, you can see that we've made some progress when it comes to who we feature in our ads, going from 25.9% representation in 2006 to 38% in 2019. And this is important because highly relevant ads have to go beyond winking and recognizing diversity and inclusion. Consistently, AIM found that the most effective and impactful ads mirror consumers genuinely with positive reflections. These ads will enhance brand perception, increase brand effectiveness, and significantly lift purchase intent and loyalty. Diving deeper into the data, we actually discover a couple of stereotypes and biases at play. First, white people are far more likely to be working and in positions of power and authority, while people of color are more likely to feature in sports or exercise-based content. We're perpetuating stereotypes of people of color doing more manual activities as opposed to using their brains. Intersectional analysis paints a bleak picture for Black female characters as well. They rarely appear, with 69% of Black characters being male, while Black female characters are 7 times more likely to be objectified than white female characters. Overall, for ads to better reflect culture, we must recognize that culture is in the eye of the beholder. We make ads for consumers, but our bias and assumptions get in the way, rendering our ads more a reflection of ourselves and not of reality itself. And this is a case for age too. Now, age is another area for improvement. Characters who are 60 plus are vastly underrepresented in Cannes Lions ads, and when they do appear, they're represented in both positive and stereotypical ways. Younger characters are more likely to be seen in an office, but characters aged 60 and over are more likely to be shown as leaders, as possessing authority, and as smart. However, their physicality is often used as a punchline. The data implies that older people are viewed as a sedentary group, and really lack agency and spirit outside of the office. And when in reality, these individuals spend their money traveling, going out, and enjoying life. What's even worse is that our media investment does not reflect consumer spending habits. As Bob Hoffman says, we're spending tens of billions of dollars on questionable practices based on questionable assumptions. Now, we're starting to get a clearer picture of how and why people might feel alienated by the ads that we make. And we're in a better position to challenge these biases and assumptions and ultimately make more authentic ads. But what other questions might data help us answer? Well, in partnership with beauty brand Bobbi Brown, Google's creative studio wanted to know how diversity in ads affected performance. But they also wanted to know in what direction. And what they found is that ads featuring a broader range of genders, ages, and ethnicities were significantly more effective than not. But why? Was it because it's important to show ads that look like me? Or is it important to reach a broader, more diverse audience? Or finally, could it be something else entirely that's causing these performance boosts? Well, to answer these questions, they tested 3 models and 3 different scripts for a new foundation. They found that ads that presented a more diverse vision of beauty in terms of age, race, and beauty led to a 21% increase in consideration. They found that these ads were more effective, not because they looked like me, because they mirrored society, but they were more effective with all audiences, ages, ethnicities, and gender. In short, they were able to reach a larger audience in a more authentic and relevant way. Now, what tools can you use? How can we unstereotype our ads? Well, for this, I'll turn to Diageo and Unilever. Diageo was named the most gender equal company in 2019 by Equileap, and is one of a number of brands publicly leading the charge when it comes to normalizing gender, race, and age bias in their ads. They've been very open about the guidelines they use to ensure that all of their ads are free from bias and stereotypes. And the framework that they've created consists of 4 guidelines. The first is characterization. This is about ensuring that the characters presented reflect the real world. Perspective, whose perspective is the story being told from? Agency, well, who is directing the ad? And representation, who is being portrayed? And the best thing about this framework is that it's simple, it's accessible, and it's actionable across multiple brands and markets. It's also applicable for the many different stages of the creative development process. And in Diageo's case, given that they operate in hundreds of markets with multiple agencies and local teams, they're now able to create more culturally nuanced and relevant ads, complete with fuller, richer, and diverse characters. So what do these guidelines look like in practice? Well, for characterization, you really should consider including imperfect individuals with complex personalities, characters who feel authentic and genuine, and people wearing appropriate clothing. But you should also be careful of only using women or other diverse groups when you want to make a political statement or an ad about diversity. You should be careful of sexualizing women, and you should be careful of focusing a particular storyline around particular gender or identity characteristics. Well, what might these guidelines look like in practice? Well, Starling Bank's recent campaign shows multiple sides of their protagonist. And this is a great example of making a more diverse and inclusive ad without making it a political statement or, even virtue signaling.
Whether you're just taking off or up and running, Starling Bank, helping business fly.
Now, Starling Bank wanted to create something that felt relatable, played by someone both authentic and warm. To do so, they described their protagonist as an entrepreneur slash mom slash superwoman. And what can you learn from this ad? Well, Starling Bank wanted to started with a clear vision of who their lead was, which enabled them to create a more authentic character. They used multiple characteristic traits or descriptive norms to create a fuller, more round character. Another great example for characterization is Gucci's recent 80s themed lipstick ads, which challenged the idea of a perfect smile. The fashion and beauty industry has often been guilty of perpetuating negative or harmful images of women, which in turn do a lot of harm. And progress is being made with many brands and consumers embracing imperfect beauty and representations of a wide range of people that feel authentic, inclusive, and also unretouched. And while a significant amount of progress has been made in marketing and the media in just the last few years, I think Gucci's newest campaign really shows that there's still a bit of work to do. And what Gucci has done well here is they've taken a clear audience anxiety around our smiles, and then they've used it to challenge stereotypes in industry norms in a powerful and positive and empowering way. So when you look for communication research, where can you find that nugget of truth about your audience? And the second of Diageo's guidelines is perspective. For this, it's important to consider including equal representation in voice-over artists, diversity in who is framing the narrative, and make sure that you include women observing the world, not just being observed or cast as objects or in scantily clad clothes. It's important to not objectify women. It's also important to make sure that women are an aspirational focus rather than just a product. So what might this look like in practice? Well, this example is a more political ad. This is Netflix is using its voice and marketing budget to tell Hollywood to make room for others.
Have you ever been in a room and didn't see anyone else like you? Have you ever thought you definitely belonged, but were told subtly or not so subtly that you didn't? You know these rooms. The world is full of those rooms. And their limits. Limits for who gets to tell stories, who gets to write, who gets to direct, who gets to act, and who gets to see their life reflected. Let's make room for voices yet to be heard, for stories yet to be told. We're making room for you to find them, and for them to find you.
And this message is equally relevant for our own industry. The beauty of this campaign is not that it's just highlighting and challenging inequality and white supremacy, but it's also inclusive to the people that help make Netflix the multicultural streaming giant that it is. Netflix manages to create a political ad without virtual signaling by using the diverse casts in their shows to speak to an issue that is specific not just to their industry, but is also a fundamental part of their business strategy. Ask yourself, how might you do the same? And the third of Diageo's guidelines is agency. For this one, you should consider including individuals in control of their lives. Make sure that there is diversity of screen time and space, and ensure that women are shown to be actively being funny. But we should also be careful of placing women or other groups as inferior to men or white men or white people in the narratives. You've got to be careful of making the brand or narrative about the person's worth, making it dependent on the product or the brand. But it's also important to and to be careful of using stereotypical labels against women. So in this example, making men boss and women bossy. So what does this look like in practice? Well, this is one of my favorite spots from H&M. The term lady generally feels pretty antiquated. So how could you go about taking that word, that message, and subverting it and challenging the stereotypes hidden within it? Well,
she's all you ever want. She's the kind of like take the dinner. She always knows her place. She's got style, she's got grace. She's a winner. She's a winner. She's a lady. Oh, she's a lady. Talking about the little lady. And the lady is mine. She's never been so great. Always something nice to say. What a blessing. What a blessing. I can leave her on her own, knowing she's okay alone. That's the message. She's a lady. Oh, she's a lady. Talking about the little lady. And the lady is mine.
Well, what this ad does really well is it subverts definitions of what it means to be a lady in a way that is more inclusive and encompassing and empowering. By taking the Lion Babe cover of Tom Jones' "She's a Lady" as the soundtrack, which actually has some pretty off-putting and sexist lyrics, like "She always knows her place," and juxtaposing it with typically unladylike activities like picking one's teeth with a knife as a mirror at the dinner table, or manspreading on the subway. They were able to subvert norms in an empowering way. So, ask yourself, how might you juxtapose certain creative elements in your ads to subvert category or industry or perceived norms? And the fourth and final of Diageo's guidelines is representation. For this one, you should consider including diversity of age, class, race, gender, and appearance. It's important to include equal numbers of men and women and all people of color to ensure that people are in non-traditional roles, but also to make sure that there is a real diversity in lead roles. It's also important to ensure and to be careful of excluding women from leading roles. You don't want to do that. You need to be careful of including women as sidekicks, and you want to be careful of stereotyping men with traditional roles as well. So how might this look in an ad? How can you represent a diverse group of people? This is perhaps my favorite ad of the bunch. McDonald's gives screen time to people that might otherwise feel unheard and unseen. Now, it should be noted that there has been a landmark change in how brands want to reach and engage people due to COVID-19. Once classed as unskilled labor, they've now been classed as key workers. So how might you reach these people?
Let's enjoy a face. Oh, sunshine in an empty place. Take me to stay. This is a rhythm of the night. The rhythm of the night. This is the rhythm of my life. The rhythm of my life. This is the rhythm of my life.
And I think what McDonald's did really well here is that they've made people who are typically underappreciated in society the hero, the focal point of the story. How might you do this for your campaigns as well? Well, so to conclude, I think as we've shown throughout this webinar, unstereotyping your ads is both is a moral, social, and commercial imperative. We must challenge our unconscious bias at all stages of the creative process. And one of the best ways to do this is with an objective framework that can allow for ideas or characters to be tested against, no matter the brand or the market involved. Finally, we must also don't be afraid to challenge conventions. Advertising has always been at its best when it says something new or something old in a new way. I think it's important to not be afraid to stand for something, but also to be careful of potentially falling into the trap of virtual signaling. And I think the reality is that this won't be easy. There are the $600 billion we spend a year amounts to tens of millions of pieces of content. Auditing past work to get those benchmarks to see where you are, and then identifying what are the most frequent stereotypes and biases in your work is pretty difficult. And what we're finding within our own clients is actually a shift in thinking. It's no longer enough to optimize creative based on best practices and brand guidelines, but also along the diversity inclusion metrics too. Brands are now using our technology to actively track their representation of diversity by age, race, and gender across all of the markets they see to see if they're telling more diverse and inclusive stories. Others are going deeper to track if they're showing stereotyped content, and they're doing this by tracking activities, placements, and roles of their characters. So, for example, if a female is on screen, is she doing domestic chores or is she a boss? And so, when they're using our technology to track even more sophisticated concepts in their creative, it's allowing them to go beyond the typical marketing challenges to focusing on industry level problems as well. And if we can help you better understand what is your current status quo of your diversity story in this unstereotyped journey, please do get in touch.